Thanks, Siobhan. Well, earlier in the show, Dr. Mary O'Kane shared some ideas for how best to approach discussing the topic of death with young children.
Mary rejoins us now to answer all of your parenting-related questions. We're just seeing some really interesting queries in this morning. Let's kick off straight away with this viewer. My mum passed away 10 months ago. She'd only been diagnosed 8 weeks before with cancer. My daughter is 9, really only starting to believe it now. She can't stop crying. What can I do?
Yes. This is a difficult one. At 9 and 10, they start to have a better understanding of what death really means. And this was clearly very traumatic for you and your daughter, diagnosed only for 8 weeks and then going through this. So it would have been hugely traumatic for everybody in the family. And it just strikes me, 10 months, we have this expectation of what a grieving time should be. But actually 10 months is not necessarily that long a time for you or your daughter to be grieving. This little girl learned in that process that the world is unsafe. So her world up until that point was probably this very safe place. And this hugely traumatic event happened in a short period of time. No doubt the whole family were grieving, so she was seeing other adults grieving. So I'd say this has shaken her to her core. Sometimes when that happens, it takes some time to really process. And after time, the reality sinks in. She's at an age where she's still also, they're quite egocentric, might be relating it back to herself. She might be worried about mum here as well. If this can happen, this could happen to her dad, this could happen to her mum, this could happen to a sibling. The fact that she's crying every night, I would say take this further. Have a word with the GP. I would think something like a little bit of play therapy can be at that age a wonderful way for them to express emotions that they just can't verbalise.
Well, what happens
so I would
in
take it further. Then? Play therapy, there's various different ways that a play therapist will approach it. But the idea of play therapy is play is a child's absolute safe space. So when they are in that moment, they might be playing with little dolls, they might be playing with sand, they might be playing with Play-Doh. It's a way of expressing what is happening, but with a fully trained, accredited, and if you're looking for a play therapist, that's important, therapist who is trained in actually how to get the child to bring out their emotions when they're in that space. It can be useful for letting them express emotion that they actually are unable to express.
Very quickly, Mary, if you are in that situation where you have, let's say, an aunt and uncle, a grandparent who is dying, do you prepare your children in advance for that?
I think it is best to know this lady had 8 weeks, and I'm sure a hugely traumatic 8 weeks, and they may not have expected this to happen within that 8-week period. But yes, we would always say if you are expecting the worst in a situation, prepare them. Again, not in one big conversation, very slowly. You're drip feeding little pieces of information. So the child is becoming prepared for this seriousness and the fact that you are all worried that this is a sad time. So you're just gently preparing them.
Using that language. We've had an anonymous text in. This lady has a 5-year-old daughter who is an only child. They would love a second child, but she has had difficulties and she doesn't think it's going to happen. However, she did have a traumatic miscarriage before the death or the birth of this first child, and she wants to tell her child, you do have a sibling, she just happens to be in heaven. The child's 5. Is it too early to have that conversation?
This is a difficult one because obviously a hugely traumatic miscarriage, and you're desperately grieving the loss of this child, and along comes another pregnancy and you're so excited, here you go again. So you're focused on that pregnancy, you're focused on that baby. So naturally, perhaps, you're not then, as that little one is growing up, immediately introducing her to the fact that she would have had an older sibling. So at 5, I would say, it's very much down to this parent if they want to introduce at this point. Most of us, if you have lost a baby, you want that child recognised in your family, in your life. It's hugely important for this mum, that I'm assuming it's a mum, sorry, I shouldn't assume that, but it's hugely important for this family, that for the parents, that they acknowledge this child that they have lost. So think carefully. It's probably likely that she wants to do that at this point. So think carefully about how you introduce it. At 5 years of age, they are quite concrete. So again, I'd say to this mum, you need to prepare yourself for some of the questions that you may be asked. So you can introduce the topic with, you know, if she talks about desperately wanting a sibling, there's something I need to tell you. It was too painful for me to tell it before. I felt you were old enough now to understand you have a sibling and tell this story. And it was so sad. Your big brother or sister couldn't live outside mummy's tummy. And just in those terms, explain it. Again, explaining anything like this is never one conversation. It's little bits of information over time. But I think this family have to prepare themselves for perhaps painful conversations for them while introducing, because it's very likely at 5 it'll be, I'd like to see a picture of my sibling. Do they look like? I want to see it. But things like planting a tree in memory of the sibling. There may be things that this family have from that time that they can show the sibling, you know, in terms of, there can be things like that you would have. It depends on at which point in the pregnancy this happened. But definitely, if you want it to be a long-term member of your family, yes, start slowly introducing this idea. And just remind this little girl how loved she is as well.
She's also just as special.
Yes.
Michelle has written in to say, hi Mary, my daughter lost her father at the age of 2 to tragic circumstances. She's now 6. And one day she asked me a question about where heaven is and if it's real. I was going to say yes and make up an answer for her, but I was questioning if this is the right approach, especially since I am not religious myself. How do I give her a hopeful outlook whilst also being honest?
Really interesting question.
Isn't it the hope that she wants her child to have?
It really is. And I get exactly where she's coming from here. Probably the most important thing to recognise here is that different people have different beliefs. And at this age, it's no harm for her child to be introduced to that. So if she doesn't see heaven as a concept that she believes in, you know, that's fine. However, potentially other members in her family do. So I think it's really important that she say to her child that, that yes, heaven is something that all over the world, millions of people have an absolute belief in heaven, and talk to the child about heaven. If this is not her belief, she might also introduce that for some of us, we also believe that actually people live on in different ways. So, for example, her dad lives on in her. You know, she is the living embodiment of her dad. So within her, like, you can say about her physical features, you know, your eyes are his, you know, your hair, that your dad is living within you. But also, people live within our memories. So she can tell her daughter memories she might have had of the dad. They could create a memory book if that was something she might like to do with her. So even if the child doesn't have memories herself, photographs of her dad maybe holding her as a baby, things like that were important. So to create these memories, because everybody lives on for years. Yeah, they live in memories. You don't have to be there. So there are lots of different ways. People live in so many different ways after they have, you know, gone from this world.
So you can reassure your child that way. I just want to get to another question, because this parent sounds like they're under real pressure. They have 2 children, 2 boys, 3 and 5 years of age, and finding it really, really difficult to discipline them, particularly in public, because they tend to have tantrums, either one or both, particularly when they're out in places like a supermarket. There's times where she's had to just abandon her shopping and walk out, holding back tears because she feels other parents are looking at her with their well-behaved children. I don't know how to discipline them, and I feel like I'm losing control.
Yeah, you just, I would say to this person, we have all been there. Oh yes, whether you're a parent of 1 or more, and with more it's more complicated. You know, we sometimes divide and conquer with 2 of them. But the first thing I have to say is about the tears and the other people and their perfect children. Oh, their children are not perfect. No, they're not.
Because nobody's perfect.
Nobody. We're not perfect. Oh my gosh, we're not perfect. They're not perfect. So don't ever think that, oh my gosh, their children probably do awful things behind closed doors. So don't let people's stares upset you. And to anybody who's listening who thinks, well, actually, I saw somebody the other day and she was not controlling her children. You know what? Give them a break. You don't know what pressure they're on. Step back from the child and keep your opinions to yourself and don't look at them or whatever. But for this mum herself, in terms of managing the 2 children, it's always difficult when there's 2, and they do sometimes gang up on you. I mean, much as we love them, sometimes they will get together. sometimes they might hate shopping. They see the tiers and they kind of know, well, we know where we're going this time. We hate doing this, and we know if we explode, she'll leave the shopping centre, she'll leave the supermarket, whatever. You can't rationalise with them when they're in that moment. So when that tantrum is in full force, you can't win. So the trick is to try and think ahead, in advance, when things are calm. So maybe before she goes out, think of little tips or techniques. No, positive reinforcement, bribery, but think about how you can approach this before you go anywhere. Make sure they're fed and watered, they're not tired. Like if you collect them from creche and you think, oh, I'm going to go in and do a big shop now, chances are they're just waiting for the meltdown. They're on the verge. So make sure they're not tired before you go out in public. Make sure you have them well fed, and actually talk to them about what you expect of them when they're out.
And reward, yes.
And now reward doesn't have to be the bar of chocolate, not necessarily. The reward can be going to the playground after. The plan is, we're going to go to the playground, we just have to do shopping, and if everybody manages to be good, we'll do this. And you can remind them, and make sure you take them, to the playground then afterwards. Also think about what they can do when they're feeling. If they're feeling annoyed, are there things they can do? They can be carrying a toy, a little glitter jar or something they have with them. They can be taking something that they know what to do to calm down. But try and preempt it is usually the best advice.
Great advice as always, Dr. Mary. We could talk to you all morning. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you who sent in your questions. We hope there was some help.
Mary. Coming up next, we'll be over on the catwalk getting some Valentine's Day outfit inspiration to have you looking lovely.